The orange sign was zip-tied to my own gate. I saw it from 100 yards out, bouncing in my truck up the dirt road I'd driven since I was 9 years old. SOLD. Bright orange. Stapled over the iron my grandfather had welded in 1971. 2 men in high-vis vests were inside my fence line, driving wooden stakes into my pasture. A woman in a navy blazer stood in the middle of my cattle field, photographing my barn. I stopped the truck. I left the engine running. I got out slow. The woman turned, saw me, and held up a hand like she was directing traffic.
Sir, you can't be on this property.
I didn't answer. She pulled a clipboard against her chest and stepped toward me.
All 1,500 acres were auctioned to Caldwell Development on Friday. If you don't leave in 5 minutes, I'll be calling the sheriff for trespassing. The new owner has every right to have you arrested.
1,500 acres. My 1,500 acres. She'd said the number out loud like it belonged to her. I looked at the sold sign on my grandfather's gate. I looked at the stranger telling me to walk away from land my family had held since 1962. I thought, this woman has no idea who I am. Ma'am, I said, what's your name? She gave me the tight little smile people give when they think they're being patient with a slow child. Marlene Voss, president of the Westridge Pines Homeowners Association. And you are? I didn't answer that either. She kept going. Sir, I understand this is upsetting. We tried to reach the previous owner for 2 years. Every notice we sent was ignored. The board had no choice but to vote to liquidate the parcel under our expanded community boundary authority. If you have questions, you can submit them in writing to the HOA office during business hours. Expanded community boundary authority. I rolled the phrase around in my head. I had never heard it before in my life. I'd been reading deeds and easements and county records since I was 22 years old, and my father first sat me down at his roll-top desk and said, "Son, if you own land in this country, you better know every word that's ever been written about it." I knew every authority a Texas HOA could legally invoke. Expanded Community Boundary Authority was not one of them. She had invented it, or someone on her board had invented it, and then 7 of them had signed something pretending it was real. The previous owner, I said quietly. You've been trying to reach him for 2 years. 2 years and 4 months. Ma'am. She watched me, waiting for me to argue. I didn't argue. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. She watched me do it. She thought I was going to call somebody. I photographed the sold sign on my gate. I photographed the orange auction notice stapled underneath it. Westridge Pines, HOA, Expanded Community Boundary Authority. I photographed her face. I photographed the surveyor's truck and his plates. I photographed the wooden stakes in my grass. I photographed Marlene Voss again, this time with the barn behind her, in case I ever needed to prove exactly where she had been standing and exactly what she had been doing. She watched all of it with that same tight smile. The older surveyor county uniform, name tag I'd read later as Dale wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the dirt like the dirt owed him money. He knew, whatever this was, he knew it wasn't clean. Sir. Marlene tapped her clipboard. 5 minutes. 5 minutes, I said. I lowered the phone. I looked at her for a long beat. I didn't tell her my name. I didn't tell her the parcel had been in my family for 64 years. I didn't tell her the deed was sitting in a fireproof safe in my front hallway, recorded the 14th of March, 1962, 27 years before her subdivision was a hole in the ground. I just nodded. I walked back to my truck. I shut the door quietly, not slammed, closed. Through the open window, I heard her say it. Heard her say it loud enough that the surveyors heard too. Loud enough that she wanted me to hear it. See? That's all it takes. These old farmers always fold. I sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and let the engine idle. I did not look at her. I looked at the gate. At the sold sign. At 1,500 acres of grass and oak and creek bottom, my grandfather had bought with money he'd earned breaking horses, that my father had paid the taxes on every year of his adult life, that I had sworn at his bedside I would never let go of. In the glove box, my dash cam was still recording. Had been recording since I'd turned onto the dirt road. Had recorded her face, her voice, her threat, and her little laugh about the old farmers. In the safe at the house, in a manila envelope behind 2 layers of fireproof lining, was the original deed, stamped, notarized, filed, never voided, older than her subdivision, older than her board, older than the fake authority she'd invented to sell what was never hers. I thought about that deed. I thought about my father telling me, the week before he died, don't ever argue with a bully until you know exactly what's in their hand and exactly what's in yours. I put the truck in reverse. I backed slow down my own road. I did not look back at Marlene Voss until I was a quarter mile out, and then only in the mirror. She was already photographing my barn again. She thought she'd just chased off a confused old rancher in a dusty Carhartt jacket. She had just handed a man with a 1,962 deed every piece of evidence he would need to put her 6 co-signers, and her own 4-bedroom house on a sheriff's auction block before the end of the year. She had no idea the man in the Carhartt jacket still held the only deed that mattered. And by Monday, she was going to be the one served papers. I drove home the long way, not because I needed to think, because I needed to not react. My father used to say there were 2 kinds of men who lost their land, the ones who didn't read the paperwork and the ones who reacted before they finished reading it. I had spent 41 years not being the first kind. I wasn't about to become the second kind in one afternoon. The dirt road from the north gate ran 4 miles before it hit the county blacktop. I drove it at 30. I watched the fence line. I counted the gates. 8 gates between the north pasture and the homestead, every one of them welded by my grandfather between 1,958 and 1,973. I knew every weld. I knew which posts leaned. I knew which stretches of barbed wire my father had restrung after the ice storm of '94, and which stretches I'd restrung after the drought of 2011. 1,500 acres. Mine. On paper, under law, since the 14th of March, 1962. I pulled into the gravel drive at the house at 2:15. The house was small. 2-bedroom, single-story, white siding, green tin roof. My great-grandparents built it in 1924. 3 generations of my family had run a working ranch off this property without ever feeling the need to upgrade the kitchen. I parked, went inside, hung my hat on the peg by the door, and walked into the front hallway. The safe was bolted into the concrete under the floorboards. My father had installed it the year I turned 18. I knelt down, lifted the loose floorboard, dialed the combination my mother's birthday, backwards, and pulled out the manila envelope. Inside, the original recorded deed. Stamped with the county recorder's seal on the 14th of March 1962. Notarized. Filed. Indexed in the county's grantor-grantee books under my grandfather's name, then my father's, then mine. 3 transfers. 3 recordings. 3 pieces of paper that made the parcel mine in a way no HOA resolution could touch. I set the envelope on my father's roll-top desk. I didn't open it. I just put it down. Then I sat, and I started reading. The Westridge Pines subdivision had been built in 1989 on 80 acres. My uncle sold to a developer named Halverson the year after my grandfather died. It was the only land my family had ever let go of. 80 acres, 200 homes, gated entry, swimming pool, a board that ran the place under standard CCRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Boring, functional. For 32 years, the HOA stayed inside its property lines. It enforced fence heights and grass length. It fined people for the wrong shade of mailbox. It was a regular suburban HOA. Then Marlene Voss got elected president 3 years ago. I'd never met her, but I knew the name. Everybody in the county knew the name. She'd run on a platform she called Protecting Property Values from Rural Blight. That was the polite version. The county newspaper had quoted her at a candidate forum, saying the working ranches surrounding our community are dragging down what our homeowners have built, and the board has tools we have not been using. I'd read that quote 2 years ago over my morning coffee. I'd folded the paper and not thought about it again. I thought about it now. I pulled my laptop over. I went to the Westridge Pines HOA website. Most HOAs make their bylaws and meeting minutes public. State law requires it. Theirs were posted but buried 3 menus deep. I found them. I started reading minutes from the last 3 years. It took me 40 minutes to find what I was looking for. Item, yadam, 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 yadama, 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 yadama. April 2023, special board meeting, 7 board members present. The text claimed the HOA had implied jurisdiction over any parcel that directly or indirectly benefited from community-maintained infrastructure, meaning roads, drainage, signage. The resolution authorized the board to assess, lien, and ultimately auction such parcels if assessments went unpaid. Underneath the resolution was a legal opinion. 3 pages, signed by an attorney named Kurt Voss. Kurt Voss, Marlene's brother-in-law. I knew the name because he'd represented a developer who tried to run a pipeline across my south pasture in 2019. I'd run him off in 20 minutes with a copy of my mineral rights filing. 7 board members had voted yes on a resolution, backed by a legal opinion from the president's brother-in-law. No outside counsel, no state attorney general review, no notice to any of the affected parcel owners. Just 7 signatures on a piece of paper that invented an authority no Texas HOA had ever legally possessed. I wrote down the 7 names on the yellow legal pad my father had left in the top drawer of the desk. Marlene Voss, President. Brent Holloway, Vice President. Carla Diaz, Treasurer. Doug Pemberton, Secretary. Linda Ashworth, At Large. Resigned 14 months ago, note that. Raymond Choi, At Large. Patricia Mendoza, At Large. 7 names, 7 signatures. 7 people who had personally signed a fraudulent legal instrument and used it to seize what wasn't theirs. I underlined the names twice, then I wrote one sentence underneath, the way my father would have written it. Don't sue the HOA, sue the people who signed. The HOA was a corporate entity. Suing the HOA meant suing a pool of dues. The pool would settle, the resolution would get quietly retired. The 7 people who'd done this would walk away, unscathed, and elect themselves a new fake authority by next spring. But the 7 individuals who had personally signed a fraudulent document, they were exposed. Personally. Their houses, their savings, their names. I stared at that sentence for a long time. I was still staring at it when Harold pulled into the drive. Harold Bowman was 76 years old, a retired postman, and my nearest neighbor half a mile down the county road, in a single wide with a vegetable garden bigger than most people's yards. He'd been my father's friend for 50 years. He brought me a casserole every time he heard something interesting in town, which was every 6 or 7 weeks, and the casseroles were how I learned what was happening in the county before the newspaper did. He came in without knocking. He set a Pyrex dish on the counter. He looked at me, looked at the deed envelope on the desk, looked at the laptop, and pulled out a chair. You hear what they did to the Hendersons? I hadn't. 2 years ago. He rubbed his jaw. The HOA that Voss woman claimed the Hendersons' back 5 acres fell inside some kind of expanded boundary, said the Hendersons owed $16,000 in back assessments. $16,000 for what? Nobody could ever explain. Hendersons couldn't afford a lawyer. They woke up one morning, and the parcel had been auctioned to some outfit called Caldwell Development. He let that sit. Hendersons lost 5 acres, he said. Joan Pelletier lost 3. Ramirez family lost 12. All to the same buyer. All under the same fake authority, all in the last 4 years. I looked at the yellow legal pad, at the 7 underlined names, at the sentence I had written under them. Harold, I said, who's the best real estate attorney in this county? He didn't even have to think about it. Eli Margolis. Knew your daddy. Office above the hardware store on Main. I picked up the phone. The call lasted 90 seconds. I told Eli who I was. I told him an HOA had auctioned 1,500 acres of my land under a fake authority I'd never been notified of. I told him 3 other families had been hit the same way. I told him I had the original 1,962 deed, dashcam footage, photographs from this morning, and 7 names. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Eli said, "Bring the deed. Bring the auction notice. Bring the meeting minutes. Bring me a list of those 7 names. And bring me coffee. I have not had a case this fun in a decade." I hung up. Harold was watching me from across the desk. "You going to fight it?" he asked. I looked at the deed envelope, at the legal pad, at the 8 gates between this house and the north pasture, and the woman in the navy blazer standing on the wrong side of all of them. "No," I said. "I'm going to collect." After Harold left, I made one more call. I ordered 4 trail cameras and 4 outdoor security cameras for the gate and the barn. I told the installer I needed them up by the weekend. He asked why the rush. I told him I had a feeling. He had them up by Friday afternoon. 2 days later, Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock. I was on the front porch with a cup of coffee when 3 vehicles pulled into my drive. Marlene Voss's white SUV in the lead. A black F-250 behind it, Brent Holloway, Vice President. the man whose name I'd underlined twice on the legal pad. And behind both of them, a county sheriff's cruiser. I set the coffee down. I did not stand up. Marlene got out first. She was wearing the same navy blazer she'd worn in my pasture, like she'd decided it was her uniform. She had a manila folder in her left hand. Brent climbed out of the F-250 behind her 6'3", mid-50s, aviators, gray polo tucked tight, the kind of man who had never in his life been told no by a woman he respected. The deputy got out last. Young guy. Name tag, said Reyes. He did not want to be there. Marlene came up my walkway like she owned it. Sir. She stopped at the bottom step. We need to speak with you about an ongoing legal matter. I sipped the coffee. Ma'am. She held out the folder. This is a cease and desist letter on behalf of the Westridge Pines Homeowners Association and Caldwell Development. You were observed on Sunday tampering with survey stakes on the parcel that was lawfully transferred last week. The board has voted to pursue criminal trespassing charges if you set foot on Caldwell's property again. I did not take the folder. I looked at Deputy Reyes. Deputy, I said, is there a criminal complaint against me? Reyes shifted his weight. Not at this time, sir. I'm here as a courtesy escort. A courtesy escort. At Mrs. Voss's request. I nodded. I kept my eyes on him, not her. Deputy, is your body cam on? He checked. Yes, sir. Good, I said. I'd appreciate it if the record reflects that this woman came to my home at 8 in the morning, threatening arrest over a property dispute concerning land my family has held title to since March of 1962. Marlene's face went still. The folder was still extended toward me. I had not taken it. I had not even leaned forward. Brent stepped past her. He pointed at my chest from the bottom step. You're going to learn really fast, old man, that this HOA doesn't lose. We've broken bigger guys than you. You think a piece of paper from 60 years ago means anything when the board has voted? You think your little ranch is special? Across the road, I could see Harold's truck pulled off on the shoulder. He'd been on his way somewhere and stopped. There were 2 other neighbors out Marisol from down the road in her bathrobe pretending to water her flower bed, and an older man I didn't know watching from his porch. Public confrontation, in the daylight. With a deputy filming, Brent did not seem to understand what he was building. I let him finish. Then I said, calmly, Deputy, please make sure the body cam picked up Mr. Holloway's statement that the HOA has broken other people. Reyes's eyes flicked sideways. The body cam, mounted on his chest, was already pointed at Brent. Marlene tried to recover. What he means is, the HOA has successfully resolved many disputes. Mrs. Voss, I said. I'm not asking him what he meant. I'm asking the deputy to confirm what he said. Reyes cleared his throat. Body cam captured the statement, sir. Marlene's lips pressed together so hard, they disappeared. I stood up then, not fast. Just stood. I walked to the edge of the porch. I was holding a single sheet of paper I'd printed the night before, a clean photocopy of the recorded 1962 deed, with the county recorder's stamp visible on the corner. I had not brought out the original. The original was where it had always been, in the safe, under the floorboards, behind 2 layers of fireproof lining. I held the photocopy out, not to Marlene, to Deputy Reyes. Deputy, would you mind taking a look at this? I think it bears on whether a criminal trespassing charge would survive 5 minutes in a courtroom. Reyes took it. He read it. He read it twice. He looked at the stamp. He looked at the grantor-grantee chain printed at the bottom. He handed it back to me, slowly, and turned to Marlene. Ma'am, he said, you might want to talk to a lawyer. A real one. The silence on my walkway was complete. I'll remember it as long as I live. The deputy's quiet voice. The folder still extended in Marlene's hand, the cease and desist she had so confidently brought to my house. Brent's mouth, half open, his arm still pointed at my chest because he'd forgotten to lower it. Reyes touched the brim of his hat. Sir, Mrs. Voss, Mr. Holloway, I think we're done here. He walked back to his cruiser. He got in. He did not look at Marlene as he backed out of my drive. The 3 of us were left on the walkway. Brent recovered first. He laughed a short, mean laugh. A piece of paper from 60 years ago. You think that beats an HOA resolution voted in by 7 board members? You think a judge is going to side with one old farmer against a community of 200 families? Marlene found her voice. She was rattled, but she still had teeth. The board has already voted to pursue criminal trespassing charges if you set foot on Caldwell's parcel again. We have the authority. We've done this before, and we'll do it again. The Hendersons learned. The Pelletiers learned. The Ramirezes learned. You're going to learn too. Good luck, old man. We'll see you in court. She turned. She walked back to her SUV. Brent followed. I watched them get in. I waited until both vehicles were pulling out of my drive before I spoke. Not loud. Just enough. Yes, ma'am, I said. You will. Across the road, Harold was still standing by his truck. He raised one hand in a small, slow wave. I raised mine back. I went inside. I picked up the phone. Eli answered on the second ring. I said, Marlene Voss just came to my house with the HOA vice president and a sheriff's deputy. She served me a cease and desist. She admitted on the deputy's body cam that the board has done this before to other people and intends to do it again. She named the Hendersons, the Pelletiers, and the Ramirezes by name. The deputy is named Reyes. There was a long, slow exhale on the other end of the line. Then Eli said, very softly, Carl. Tell me she said it on body cam. On body cam. Carl. I could hear him smiling through the phone. Carl, that body cam footage is now a public record. We can subpoena it inside a week. She just put a personal liability exhibit in her own evidence locker. She has no idea what she just did. I closed my eyes for a moment. How soon can you draft the complaint? I started drafting it the day you walked into my office. I'll have it filed by Friday. I hung up. I went back out to the porch. The coffee was cold. I poured it into the grass and went inside to make a fresh cup. She had brought a cease and desist letter. She had brought a sheriff. She had brought her vice president to threaten me at my own front door. And on her way out, she had named, by name, 3 families she'd already done this to. She had no idea that every word she'd said in front of that deputy was being recorded, and she had just said the one thing that would cost her her house. I went to see the Hendersons on Wednesday morning. Their farmhouse sat on the east edge of the county white 2-story wraparound porch, tin roof that had needed paint for a decade. Both 80 years old. They were the kind of people who never said a hard word about anybody, and the kind of people Marlene Voss had counted on to fold. Eileen Henderson opened the door before I knocked. Harold had called ahead. We sat at the kitchen table. Walt was in his work shirt, hands folded on the oilcloth, the same posture I'd seen my father sit in 1,000 times. I told them what had happened to me Friday, the surveyors, the sold sign, the woman in my pasture. Eileen put her hand over Walt's. Then Walt told me their story. One notice, 2 years and 3 months ago, taped their back gate. Phrases neither of them understood. Their bank manager hadn't known what it was. The lawyer in town had wanted $3,000 to look into it. They hadn't had $3,000 to spare. 6 months later, driving to church, they'd seen the Caldwell development sign on their back 5 acres, a bulldozer, stakes. Eileen had cried in the car. Walt hadn't said a word the whole way home. When he finished, he looked at me across the table. Son, you came here to tell us we weren't alone. You weren't, I said. I told them about the lawyer, about the lawsuit. I told them I wasn't asking for money. I was asking, if it came to it, for testimony. Walt looked at Eileen. Eileen looked at me. We'll testify, she said. I drove out to Joan Pelletier's that afternoon. Joan was 79, widowed 11 years, lived alone in a small brick house at the end of a gravel cul-de-sac. She'd lost 3 acres of wooded lot her late husband had bought her as a wedding gift in 1966. He'd cleared a walking path through it himself, by hand, so they could walk it together on their anniversaries. He died on a Tuesday in October. She'd walked the path every October since. She'd lost the lot in 2022. She had not walked the path since. She told me the story without crying. The way old people tell you about things that have already broken them once and won't get another chance. She handed me the notice from a drawer in her hallway. Same template, same fake authority, same 7 signatures. If you can use this, she said, take it. I took it. I went to the Ramirezes last. 12 acres of peach orchard, 3 generations, taken in 2024. The 2 grown sons, Mateo and Hugo, sat with me on the porch. They had spent 8 months looking for a lawyer who would take it on contingency. Nobody would. Mateo set his iced tea down very slowly when I finished. We're in, he said. Tell us what you need. By Wednesday evening, I had 4 families, 3 bankers' boxes of paperwork in the bed of my pickup, and a manila envelope full of original notices, every one of them on the same letterhead, everyone using the same fake phrase, everyone signed by the same 7 names. I drove into town Thursday morning. Eli's office was above the hardware store on Main, up a flight of stairs that smelled like sawdust and varnish. He met me at the door, took one look at the boxes, and held it open with his shoulder. "Bring it in. All of it." We laid the papers across his conference table. 4 families, 4 parcels, 4 sham auctions at prices ranging from $23,000 to $312,000 for land worth. Conservatively, 10 to 20 times each price. Same template, same brother-in-law's legal opinion, clipped to every cover sheet. Eli stood at the head of the table for a long time. Then he said, "Carl, I want to introduce you to one more person." He picked up the desk phone. 20 minutes later, the door buzzed. A woman in her early 50s came up the stairs, short gray hair, reading glasses pushed up. She carried a manila folder bound with 2 thick rubber bands. "Linda Ashworth," Eli said. "Former secretary, Westridge Pines HOA." Linda set the folder on the table. She looked at me. "I've been waiting 14 months for someone to ask me about this." She opened it. Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, between Marlene Voss and Doug Caldwell. They went back 4 years. They discussed parcels by address before the lien votes happened. One email, 3 weeks before the Henderson auction, read, "Doug, the back 5 from the Henderson place will go on the calendar in March. Make sure your bid number stays under 40,000 like we discussed. Brent will handle the posting requirements on this end. I read it 3 times. I looked at Linda. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "I tried. 14 months ago." She took the glasses off. "The deputy who took my statement was Brent Holloway's cousin. The file got closed within a week. I quit the board the next morning. I kept everything. I knew somebody would come eventually." Eli was already smiling that small, careful lawyer's smile. "Eli," I said, "how does this change things?" He sat down. He folded his hands. "Before today, I was going to sue 7 people for civil fraud and ask the court to void the transfers. We'd have won. It would have taken 18 months. The judgment would have come out of HOA reserves and insurance, and 4 of them, maybe 5, would have kept their houses." He nodded at Linda's folder. "With these emails, we're adding conspiracy and tortious interference. We're naming Caldwell Development as a co-conspirator. We're requesting punitive damages. And the same day we file the complaint, we're recording lis pendens notices on the personal residence of every board member." "Lis pendens," I said. "Latin for lawsuit pending. We record it on the title of a piece of real estate. The minute we record those notices, every one of those 7 houses is locked. They can't sell. They can't refinance. They can't move equity to a cousin or a spouse. Locked until the case resolves. And if we win, and they can't pay?" Eli leaned back. "Then we collect from what they own," he said, "including their houses." The room was quiet. I thought about Eileen Henderson saying, "We'll testify." I thought about Joan handing me the notice from her drawer. I thought about Mateo setting his iced tea down. I thought about Marlene Voss laughing in my pasture about how old farmers always fold. "Eli," I said, "is this fair? Going after their houses?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, he said it slowly. "Carl, they went after yours first. They went after the Hendersons. They went after Jones. They went after the Ramirezes. You are not taking revenge. You are collecting a judgment. There is a difference, and the law knows the difference. And you'll sleep better if you remember it." I nodded. I signed the retainer. On the way home, I stopped at the county recorder's office. Patty Mae Olson had worked there 31 years. She pulled certified copies of 4 specific transfers in 20 minutes. When she handed them over, she said quietly, "I always wondered when somebody was going to ask for these." That night, I laid them out on my father's roll-top desk. The 1,962 deed. The certified copies of all 4 fraudulent transfers. Linda's emails. The 4 families' notices. Eli's signed retainer. The yellow legal pad with the 7 names. 8 items. I photographed them in a single overhead shot. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 6 days, I slept. The phone rang at 2:47 the morning. I had been asleep maybe 4 hours. I knew the number on the screen before I picked up the volunteer fire department. "Carl, it's Tom. Your hay barn is on fire. We're on scene. Get over here." I was in my truck inside 90 seconds. I drove the 4 miles to the north pasture with both hands tight on the wheel. and the sky in front of me lit orange against the dark. By the time I pulled up, the barn was gone. The roof had collapsed. The frame was a black skeleton against the firelight. Tom Riley, fire chief, 61, third-generation rancher himself, walked over slow. He didn't say anything for a long beat. He just stood next to me and let me look. The barn my grandfather had built in 1958. Hand-cut beams. The brand seared into the front post. 67 years gone in an hour. Cattle? I asked. I had to push the word out. Empty. Whoever did this knew the herd was in the south pasture this week. I closed my eyes. This wasn't electrical, Carl. We found accelerant. Gasoline trail from the back door to the hay bales. Whoever lit it knew what they were doing. The wind shifted. I smelled the gasoline then, faint under the smoke. Whoever did this knew the cattle were in the south pasture. Whoever did this knew the back door of the barn. Whoever did this had been on the property recently enough to know the routine. Tom, I said, I've got security cameras. He looked at me. Since when? Since 6 days ago. Trail cameras at the gate. Hardwired cameras on the barn corners. Installed Friday. Tom keyed his radio and told one of his guys to make sure nothing got touched on the south side where the camera mounts were. Then he walked back toward the fire. I stood there until sunrise. I had been calm for 6 days. I had been calm because calm was winning. Standing there at 5:30 in the morning, looking at black timbers where my grandfather's barn used to be, I had to decide all over again whether to stay calm. I decided to stay calm. At 6 a.m., I called Eli. I told him about the accelerant. I told him about the cameras. The line was quiet for 10 seconds. Carl, I am very sorry about your barn, and I have to be honest with you. This is the best thing that could have happened to your case. I know. Arson during pending civil litigation is witness intimidation. The minute we put a name on this, and we will, we're not just talking civil fraud anymore. We're talking criminal conspiracy. Real handcuffs on at least one of those 7. I know. Carl, I filed a complaint yesterday afternoon. The lis pendens notices on all 7 houses were recorded at 4:15 p.m. Every one of those board members knew their houses were locked before they went to bed last night. I closed my eyes again. Somebody on that board had gone home, pulled up the county recorder's website, seen the notice on their own title, and decided to drive out to my north pasture at 1 a.m. with a can of gasoline. Pull the camera footage, Eli said. Get it to me before you call the sheriff. I drove home. I logged into the camera system at the kitchen table. 4 angles. 2 on the barn corners, 2 on the gate. At 1:14 a.m., the gate camera picked up a dark F-250 parking on the county road. Lights off. 2 figures in dark hoodies got out. They came over the fence. They walked the quarter-mile to the barn on foot. The barn cameras picked them up at 1:23. The taller one walked around to the back door. He moved like Brent Holloway. I had watched Brent stand on my walkway 48 hours earlier. I knew his walk. I knew his shoulders. I knew the way he carried his weight on his right side. It wasn't a face shot. It wasn't a confession. But it was him. The shorter figure I didn't recognize. Hood up, head down, careful not to look at any of the 4 cameras he'd never bothered to check for. He carried the gas can. The taller figure poured. At 1:31, they walked back to the truck. At 1:33, the headlights came on. At 1:37, the first flames were visible. At 1:42, the structure was fully involved. I copied the footage to 3 flash drives. 1 to Eli at 7:30 a.m., 1 to Tom Riley at the firehouse at 8, 1 in the safe, under the floorboards, next to the deed. Tom watched the footage twice. He paused on the taller figure mid-stride. That's Brent Holloway. That's what I think. I've worked alongside Brent on 3 county fundraisers. That's his walk. That's him. Tom called the sheriff's department from the firehouse phone in front of me. He didn't go to dispatch. He called the captain directly, a man Tom had served with in the National Guard in the 90s. He told the captain what was on the footage. He told him there was a pending civil lawsuit and a recorded lis pendens, and that the arson had happened inside 12 hours of the filing. The captain did not say, "Let me look into it." The captain said, "We'll have a deputy at your door inside the hour." 2 state arson investigators were walking my property by 3 p.m. They took samples from the accelerant trail. They photographed the camera mounts. They asked me to walk them through the property line. That same afternoon, Marlene Voss made a tactical error. She posted on the Westridge Pines community Facebook page at 4:08 p.m. While we extend our sympathies to Mr. Redacted for his recent property loss, the HOA reminds all residents that ongoing legal disputes do not justify retaliatory accusations against board members. We are confident the investigation will confirm no community involvement. The post was screenshotted within an hour. 3 different residents sent me copies before sundown. She had publicly acknowledged the lawsuit. She had publicly framed the arson investigation as a retaliatory accusation. She had publicly committed to a defense, no community involvement that the camera footage would destroy. Eli called me at 6 p.m. He was laughing the way lawyers laugh when an opposing party gives them a gift. Carl, she posted a defense before she has a lawyer. She's done. She just doesn't know it yet. That same evening, the first car pulled into my drive. Harold. He brought coffee. Then Joan Pelletier with a casserole I did not have the heart to refuse for the second time in a week. Then, Eileen Henderson. She did not say anything. She hugged me on the porch and held on for a long moment. Then both Ramirez's sons with shovels and a small chainsaw in the bed. We came to help you clear. Tell us where you want us. By dark, there were 9 vehicles in my drive. Marisol from down the road. A young couple from the east side I didn't know yet. 3 teenage boys I assumed were somebody's grandsons. 2 neighbors from the Westridge Pines side of the line, homeowners, dues-paying members of the HOA who had heard what happened and wanted to stand on the right side of it. Harold walked up to the porch with his coffee. "Carl," he said, "I think the spell just broke." I didn't answer. I just nodded. What I was thinking, what I did not say out loud, was that Marlene Voss had spent 3 years teaching the county to be afraid of her HOA. And in one night, with 1 gas can, somebody on her board had reminded every neighbor on 3 sides of the property line that the people on the board were just people, and the people on the board could be afraid too. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the porch with the last cup of coffee. When the fire chief had told me what they used to start it, I had known something Marlene didn't know yet. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was an attempt to make sure I'd never make it to court. And it was the single biggest mistake the Westridge Pines HOA had ever made. Marlene Voss made her second tactical error 9 days after the fire. She called a special community meeting at the Westridge Pines clubhouse. The stated purpose: to address recent disputes and correct misinformation circulating in our community. She wanted a controlled room. She wanted 90 minutes of unanswered podium time in front of her own dues-paying members. She had not counted on who would show up. The meeting was Tuesday evening at 7. I parked on the county road outside the gates and walked in. Harold drove in with me. Eli parked in the visitor lot. The Hendersons came in Walt's old Buick. Joan rode in with the Ramirezes. Linda Ashworth came in her own car and sat in the back. When I walked through the clubhouse doors at 7:03, the room was already full. 90 chairs, all taken. Another 30 people standing along the back wall. Marlene was at the front, dais set up with 5 chairs behind it for the remaining board members. Brent Holloway's chair was conspicuously empty. He had been arrested 4 days earlier on arson and witness intimidation charges. Marlene saw me walk in. She kept her face still. She had not expected me to come. She had not, apparently, considered that a public meeting open to all homeowners might be attended by the people the HOA had stolen from. I sat in the second row. Eli sat at the back with a yellow legal pad on his knee, taking notes. Marlene called the meeting to order at 7:05. She opened with a speech. The board had done excellent work. Property values were up 12%. The reserve fund had grown from $400,000 to $1.2 million over 3 years. There had been, she said, some unfortunate confusion in recent weeks regarding administrative matters at the periphery of our community. She introduced Doug Caldwell to brief applause, a trusted community partner who has helped us steward parcels of land that needed careful management. Doug stood, nodded, sat back down. He looked like a man who had not slept in 11 days. She closed her opening remarks with what she clearly believed was the line of the evening. Westridge Pines is not afraid of being held accountable. We have nothing to hide. She opened the floor for questions. The first question came from a young woman in the 4th row, early 30s, ponytail, lived in the subdivision with her husband and 2 kids. She stood. Marlene, is it true the HOA sold a 1,500-acre ranch without the owner's knowledge? Marlene's smile locked. That's a complete misrepresentation. The parcel was processed through proper expanded boundary procedure after 2 years of unanswered notices. We have nothing to hide. The young woman did not sit down. 2 years of unanswered notices. To who? To the listed owner of record. Who is the listed owner of record? Marlene's mouth opened, then closed. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was recording, sitting on my knee. Texas is a one-party consent state. Eli had told me to leave it running from the moment I walked through the door. Marlene tried to pivot. The administrative details of any specific parcel. Joan Pelletier stood up in the third row. Joan was 79. She used a cane. She had not spoken in public since her husband's funeral. She stood up slowly, both hands on the back of the chair in front of her. "You sold my husband's lot 3 years ago," she said. "I never got a notice. The first I heard was when I drove past and saw it cleared." The room did not move. Eileen Henderson stood up 2 rows over. "You sold our back 5 acres 2 years ago. We got 1 notice. It had words we didn't understand. We took it to our bank. We took it to a lawyer in town. Nobody could help us for less than $3,000. 6 months later, we drove past our own land on the way to church, and there was a bulldozer on it." Mrs. Ramirez stood up. She held a folded handkerchief in both hands. 12 acres. Peach orchard. 3 generations. My husband planted the first row in 1971. You sold it for $42,000 to that man. She nodded at Doug Caldwell. It was worth $400,000. He sold it again 6 weeks later for $390. A man near the back said, audibly, "Jesus Christ." Marlene tried again. "With respect, these are individual administrative matters." Linda Ashworth stood up in the back. She did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Marlene, I have the emails. The ones you and Doug exchanged in 2023 about the Henderson auction price. The ones where you told him to keep his bid number under 40,000. Should I read them out? Or should you?" Doug Caldwell went the color of skim milk. He half stood from the front row, then sat back down. His own lawyer pulled him down by the arm. I had not stood up yet. I had not said one word. I stood up then. "I have one question for the board," I said. "Did all 7 of you sign the April 2023 resolution that authorized the expanded Community Boundary Authority program?" Silence. Marlene's eyes flicked left, then right. The 4 board members on the dais looked at each other. The treasurer, Carla Diaz, said slowly, "Yes." The secretary nodded. "Yes." The 2 at-large members were last. Raymond Choi said, after a long pause, "I signed it. But I want the record to reflect that I was told by counsel the program was legally sound. I had concerns at the time. I asked for outside review. I was told it had been provided. I did not know it was provided by Mrs. Voss's brother-in-law." Patricia Mendoza, next to him, picked up the thread. "I also had concerns. I want the record to reflect that as well." At the back of the room, Eli slowly wrote something on his legal pad. Marlene's voice came out hoarse. "This meeting is not a courtroom. These accusations will be addressed through proper legal channels. This meeting is adjourned." She banged the small wooden gavel. Nobody got up. She banged it again. I said this meeting is adjourned. People started to move slowly. They did not look at her. They looked at the 4 families standing in the rows. They looked? A Linda in the back. They looked at me. I walked out without saying anything else. Eli caught up to me in the parking lot. "Carl," he said quietly, "did you hear what Choi and Mendoza just did?" I heard. They just told 90 witnesses, on the record, that they were misled by Mrs. Voss. They've opened the door to a cooperator settlement. They're going to call me tomorrow. Reduces the case against them. Increases the case against the others. Considerably. Deputy Reyes was standing in uniform near his cruiser at the edge of the parking lot. He was off duty. He lived in the subdivision. He stepped over as I passed. "Mr. Carl, I want you to know. The DA's office served the 2nd round of paperwork this morning. They're moving on the conspiracy referral. Mrs. Voss is being picked up Friday for questioning." I nodded. He touched the brim of his hat and walked back to his cruiser. I drove home. She had gavelled the meeting closed, thinking she had survived it. She had no idea the deputy in the back of the parking lot had already been briefed on the criminal complaint. She had no idea 2 of her own board members had just walked themselves into a cooperating witness deal in front of 90 neighbors. She had been very confident, 3 weeks earlier, that old farmers always fold. She was about to learn what we don't do. 6 weeks after the town hall, I walked up the steps of the county courthouse with the manila envelope under my arm. The envelope was the original, the 1962 deed. I had not taken it out of the safe in 23 years. I had taken it out at 4:30 that morning and held it on my kitchen table for a long minute before I slid it into the envelope and walked out. Eli met me at the courthouse doors. He took one look at the envelope. Today's the day. Today's the day. Inside courtroom 3B, the seats were full. 40 residents from Westridge Pines, all 4 affected families. Harold in the back row, Tom Riley, Linda Ashworth 2 rows behind Eli's table. Rachel, the young woman who had asked Marlene the first question at the town hall, was sitting next to her husband near the aisle. Local newspaper reporter at the back. At the defendant's table sat 5 board members. Marlene Voss in the center. Brent Holloway was not present. He was in county jail awaiting his arson trial. Raymond Choi and Patricia Mendoza sat at their own table with their own attorney, separated. Doug Caldwell sat at a third table on the far left, alone with his lawyer. 3 tables, 3 defenses, 3 different futures. Marlene did not look at me when I walked in. She had been picked up by the DA's office the Friday after the town hall, questioned for 6 hours, released pending the conspiracy charge. She had aged 10 years and 6 weeks. There was gray at the part line. The blazer was the same blazer. Judge Hartwell took the bench at 9 sharp, mid-60s. No nonsense. 22 years on this bench. Counsel, are we ready? We are, Your Honor, Eli said. Eli walked to the podium. He did not bring notes. He almost never brought notes. He asked the court to take judicial notice of the Westridge Pines plat map, filed with the county in 1992. He projected it on the courtroom screen. 347 acres, 200 residential lots, defined boundaries. Then, he projected my deed, 1,500 acres. North of the Westridge Pines plat by more than a quarter mile. The 2 parcels did not overlap. They never had overlapped. The deed was older than the HOA, older than the subdivision, older than Marlene Voss had been alive. Eli walked the original deed to the bench. He handed the envelope to Judge Hartwell. The judge took it. He opened it carefully. He examined the seal. He examined the notary stamp. He read the chain of title, my grandfather to my father to me. He looked up at the defendant's table. Mrs. Voss, on what legal authority did your board sell this man's land? Marlene's lawyer leaned in and whispered urgently. The Expanded Community Boundary Authority Resolution, Your Honor. And on what state statute does that resolution rely? Her mouth opened. Her lawyer whispered again, longer this time. Marlene's mouth closed. The courtroom waited. The judge waited. After a full 12 seconds, I counted. Marlene's lawyer said, Your Honor, we would request a brief recess to... Denied. Mrs. Voss, the question stands. Marlene said, I cannot identify a specific statute at this moment. The judge wrote something down. He nodded at Eli. Continue, counsel. Eli did not list dump exhibits. He moved one at a time. Linda's emails entered as a single bundle summarized in 2 sentences. These show coordinated bid rigging between the HOA president and Caldwell Development across 4 sham auctions over 4 years. He played a 30-second clip of the email about keeping the Henderson bid under $40,000. Doug Caldwell's lawyer did not object. The certified copies from the county recorder Eli entered as one bundle, summarized in 1 sentence. The body cam audio from Deputy Reyes's visit to my porch Eli played the 30-second clip where Marlene named the Hendersons, the Pelletiers, and the Ramirezes, and said, We've done this before, and we'll do it again. The room was very quiet. The security camera footage from my barn Eli played 15 seconds. The figure walking around to the back door. The gas can. Tom Riley was already on the witness list to make the identification. Marlene's Facebook post Eli entered it. He read 1 sentence aloud. We are confident the investigation will confirm no community involvement. He did not add commentary. The barn footage was still on the screen behind him. He turned to the bench. Your Honor, plaintiff has established that the Expanded Community Boundary Authority is a fiction, that the 4 transfers were the product of a coordinated 4-year scheme between Mrs. Voss and Mr. Caldwell, that arson and witness intimidation were committed during the pendency of this litigation. We ask the court to void the 4 transfers, restore title, and enter judgment on the personal liability claims. He sat down. Marlene's lawyer stood. He spoke for 11 minutes. He cited HOA powers in the abstract. He cited reliance on counsel. He cited good faith. Every argument he had been trained to cite had been gutted before he walked into the courtroom that morning. The judge let him finish. He thanked him. Then he ruled from the bench. He did not take it under advisement. He had a folder in front of him he had clearly prepared in advance. The expanded Community Boundary Authority resolution adopted on the 11th of April 2023 is hereby declared void ab initio. It had no basis in Texas statute. It exceeded the authority granted to homeowners associations under the Texas Property Code. The legal opinion attached to it, provided by counsel of close personal relation to the board president, does not constitute the kind of independent review the law requires. He turned a page. All 4 transfers executed under that resolution are hereby voided. Title in each parcel reverts to the original owners. The county recorder is ordered to amend the indexes accordingly. The HOA reserve account is frozen pending forensic audit. He turned another page. Personal liability is established against 5 defendants: Marlene Voss, the treasurer, the secretary, and 2 at-large members for civil fraud, conspiracy, and tortious interference. Joint and several liability applies. Damages: $6.2 million compensatory, $4 million punitive. He looked up. The cooperating witnesses, Mr. Choi and Miss Mendoza, are subject to reduced settlement terms negotiated separately. He looked at Marlene's table. This judgment is enforceable immediately. The lis pendens notices currently recorded against defendants' personal residences remain in effect and shall be converted to abstracts of judgment upon filing. He set the folder down. The court is in recess. He stood up. He walked out. For a moment, nobody at the defendant's table moved. Then Marlene put her face in her hands. Carla Diaz was already crying. The secretary was staring at the table in front of him. Doug Caldwell was being walked out the side door by his lawyer, who was already on the phone. I sat at the plaintiff's table and did not move. Eli leaned over very quietly. Carl, the judgment is $10.2 million. The 5 non-cooperating defendants' total home equity, on public record, is approximately $2.1 million. The cooperators are settling for figures that protect their homes but exhaust their savings. I nodded. The houses are coming. I looked at Marlene across the room. She had not moved her hands from her face. 6 weeks earlier, she had stood in my pasture and told me old farmers always fold. In a county courtroom on a Tuesday morning, she had been asked under what authority she had sold my 1,500 acres. She had not been able to answer. I walked to the clerk's desk and asked her, politely, to handle the deed with care when she refiled it. She said she would. On the courthouse steps, the photographer asked if I wanted to make a statement. No, I said. Thank you. I drove home. I put the original deed back in the manila envelope. I put the envelope back in the safe under the floorboards. I locked the hallway. That night I sat on my porch in the dark and watched the headlights move along the county road. The land was mine again. On paper, in the recorder's index, in the eyes of the court, and the 5 people who had tried to take it were about to lose what they had spent their adult lives building. I did not feel joy about that. I felt something quieter. I felt like my father had been right. The sheriff's auctions ran on a Saturday in October. 3 months after the ruling, the county sheriff's office posted notice of the foreclosure sales in the courthouse window and in the local paper, the way they had to by law. 5 houses on the auction calendar. The treasurer, the secretary, the 2 at-large members who had not cooperated, and, last on the list, Marlene Voss. I did not go to the auctions. Eli went. He bid on nothing. He attended in the capacity Texas law required of him as plaintiff's counsel of record. He called me at 4 that afternoon and told me how it had gone. The 5 houses had moved through the sale in under 3 hours. Quiet auctions. A few investors. 2 of the houses went to families from inside the subdivision who had been waiting to upgrade. Marlene's house, 4-bedroom, 2-bath, on the cul-de-sac she had been HOA president of for 3 years, sold to a young couple with a baby on the way. $42,000 below market because of the encumbrances. They paid cash. By Monday morning, the orange and white sheriff's sold signs were posted on 5 front lawns inside the Westridge Pines gates. Eli had told me they looked exactly like the one that had been zip-tied to my gate 4 months earlier. I drove past on a Saturday a week later. I was on my way to the feed store. I had no business driving the loop road through the subdivision, but I drove it anyway, slow, with both hands on the wheel. The first sold sign was on Carla Diaz's lawn. The second was on Doug Pemberton's, the secretary, 2 houses down. The third and fourth were across the cul-de-sac. Marlene's was the 5th. Her house sat back from the road. The lawn was still trimmed. She had kept it neat to the end. The sheriff's sold sign was planted in the grass directly under the bay window. The sign was bright orange, white lettering, the same orange, the same lettering, I pulled over to the curb. I did not get out of the truck. I just sat there for a minute and looked. A neighbor walking a dog across the street raised a hand in a small wave. I raised mine back. He kept walking. I had spent 32 years walking past my father's gate without ever really seeing the brand my grandfather had welded into it. I had spent 4 months thinking about that gate every single day. I would spend the rest of my life remembering the morning a stranger in a navy blazer had stood inside my fence and told me to walk away from it. And I would spend the rest of my life remembering this one. I put the truck in drive. I did not film the sign. I did not photograph it. I did not text anybody about it. I drove on to the feed store, picked up what I needed, and drove home. The other layers of the fallout came in their own time. Marlene moved out of state. The local paper ran a small item about it on page 5. The young couple who had bought her house painted the front door yellow and installed a swing set in the backyard before Thanksgiving. Brent Holloway was convicted on the arson and witness intimidation charges. He served 18 months at a state facility, was released on parole, and did not return to the county. The cousin who had been a sheriff's deputy quietly took an early retirement in the spring. Doug Caldwell pled out on the wire fraud and conspiracy counts in federal court. Caldwell Development's assets were forfeited. The peach orchard that had belonged to the Ramirez family was returned, along with the Hendersons' back 5 acres and Joan Pelletier's 3 wooded acres on the south side of the county. Joan walked the path that her late husband had cleared for her in October, for the first time in 3 years, on what would have been their 55th wedding anniversary. The HOA was placed under court-supervised receivership for 9 months, while the forensic audit ran. A new board was elected at a special election in February. The new board's first action, voted unanimously, was to mail formal apology letters to all 4 affected families. Their second action was to strike the expanded Community Boundary Authority resolution from the bylaws. Eileen Henderson's grandson, a college sophomore, ran unopposed for the at-large seat that fall. He won with 100% of the vote. Of the $10.2 million judgment, I did not keep most of the money. After Eli's fees and costs, the compensatory damages broke down across the 4 families based on appraised market value. I directed an additional $1.2 million from my own share money the law said was mine to be split among the 3 other families. The Hendersons paid off their farm. Joan paid the property taxes on her brick house through the end of her life. The Ramirezes replanted the rows that had been bulldozed. I kept enough to rebuild the barn. What was left, I put into a small county legal aid trust. $600,000. The trust pays for a real estate attorney's fees for any county resident who receives a notice from an HOA or a developer claiming jurisdiction over their land. It is administered out of Eli's office. He charges the trust at half his hourly rate. He has handled 4 cases for the trust so far. He has won all 4. The barn went up in the spring. Same foundation my grandfather had laid in 1958. New beams, milled at a yard 60 miles west. The Hendersons' grandson drove out one Saturday with a welder his uncle had taught him to use, and helped Hugo Ramirez set the new front post. They welded the family brand back into the iron above the wide door. Different hands, same brand. Harold brought coffee, Joan brought a pie. Eileen Henderson sat in a folding chair near the new fence and watched the boys work for 2 hours, and did not say a single word the whole afternoon. She had earned the right not to talk. The 1,962 deed is still in the safe under the floorboards. The trail cameras are still mounted on the gate. I check them now and then out of habit, not fear. On the last Saturday of October, the day the leaves on the creek bottom turned gold, I drove the dirt road up to the north gate. The sold sign was gone. The wooden stakes were gone. The grass where the surveyors had stood had grown back in. The fence had been restrung that summer by a crew Mateo Ramirez had recommended. I sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. There were 200 head of cattle in the south pasture. There were 1,500 acres of grass and oak and creek bottom in the recorder's index under my name. There was, in town, a small trust at a small law firm above a hardware store, paying for the next family who would need it. My father had told me, the week before he died, don't ever argue with a bully until you know exactly what's in their hand and exactly what's in yours. I had not argued with her. I had read every word in her hand. I had read every word in mine, and the words in mine were older. I got out of the truck. I walked up to the gate my grandfather had welded in 1971. I put my hand on the iron for a moment, then I opened it and drove through. The land was quiet. The land was mine. I closed the gate behind me.